So welcome to Living Abled Perspective from the Injured Worker. Today I have with me Dr. Chris Brigham.
Hi.
Dr. Les Kertay.
Hi.
And Becky Curtis of Take Courage Coaching. So,
hello.
And today, we're going to begin right away with, since we've done these with Les and Chris before, we're going to begin right away with letting Becky share her story of why she's here, essentially, the perspective from the injured worker. So Becky, would you like to start?
I would be glad to. Yeah, about 11 years ago, I was driving for my work, and I was in a really bad rollover car accident. And when the car came to a stop, I knew that I had broken my neck. And sure enough, I am a C4 incomplete quadriplegic. I am very grateful for that incomplete word. But I had a pretty tough recovery. Nothing from the neck down worked. And I had to learn how to walk. My left side never did recover very well. I have spasticity and muscle weakness, partial paralysis on my left side. My right side, it looks normal, but I can't feel hot or cold, sharp or dull on my right side. And I thought it was all recovered and everything was going really well. And I was walking and out of the wheelchair, and then I developed burning nerve pain from the neck down. And when that nerve pain started, I really just thought, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm not going to be able to live like this. And I tried all kinds of different medications and everything, and nothing would take away the central nerve pain. And so we tried all kinds of different things. I finally was sent to a functional restoration program where I learned that pain is an experience, and it's an experience that I get to decide what it means. And so I gradually started trying some of the different modalities for helping me to live abled, and started changing my thinking around my pain. I had already really done fine with the disability, but the pain was very disabling for me. And I found myself not sleeping at night, not exercising during the day, not doing things with my family. I wasn't working. I was mostly just laying in my recliner feeling sorry for myself. And then I learned that there were some things that I could do to manage my pain, and started doing those. Was able to get out of the recliner and decided that I wanted to really live life. Instead of just my family was doing things without me, and I wanted to really get in there and do life in a healthy way. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And from there, I decided that I wanted to spend the rest of my life helping people that have pain to live good and healthy and functional lives.
Excellent. So, gentlemen, would you like to chime in here, comment on Becky's experience a little bit and how that differs from the norm, if you will?
Sure, I could start, and then Les, if you could, add on to that or correct me. Becky, hearing your story and hearing it also live when you've spoken in other forums, most recently as the keynote speaker at the IAIBC meeting, I was impressed how you took that experience and you really empowered yourself to take control of your life. That you recognize that there was one Becky pre-injury and there's another Becky now, and both Beckys are phenomenal, and both are going to experience joyful, productive lives. That you had a different experience with your life now than you had before, but you weren't giving up. You were incredibly resilient. You were positive. You took control. You were discerning in your treatment. You focused on all aspects of how this faces your health, from our discussions of your body, mind, and spirit. You made wise lifestyle choices. And you also had healthcare providers that were supportive to you. So this seems to be quite different than others who get trapped in their experience and they get sort of stuck in the past, so they can't move toward a more positive future. So I was, very inspired by what you shared with us, and I just applaud you again. It that is the way that it should be. I mean, and you had a injury that was a catastrophic injury. It's much greater in severity physically than typically what we see with work-related injuries, fortunately. But you went beyond that and continue to do that in your Take Courage coaching program, where you're now sharing your experience with others. So I was just very impressed by that. Les, how do you react to Becky's experience, and how does that relate to your, you've had such experience in the disability arena over years and have seen similar cases that have had different outcomes, but what does her experience mean to you?
Well, I think it is. I think Chris and Becky, Chris, you said it. I mean, it's the outcome that ought to happen when things are all working right. I think the part that is most interesting to today from the the injured worker perspective, or the injured person perspective, I think what's really interesting is how you, Becky, came to make that decision. It's pretty clear from hearing your story and listening to you tell it that there was a point at which, you could have gone either way. And I think that those kinds of decisions are the parts that are really interesting. I focus a lot on the health providers who either facilitate that or get in the way. Certainly there are systems factors that can facilitate or get in the way, but I think it's really valuable to hear the perspective of somebody who's been through something like this and clearly made a choice to live your life in a different way. Some ways that's the more natural response, but we tend to see the ones that don't go that way, unfortunately. So I think it's great to hear your story.
So,
Well,
Becky,
go
I'm
ahead. Sorry.
No, go right ahead. I'd rather you comment than wait for me to ask. So.
I was just going to say that it's kind of a daily decision. And, that decision was more difficult and more intentional at the beginning. I remember when one of the doctors came in and I had my, I'd been intubated. So they'd taken all the tubes out and I was able to say, what's my prognosis? And the first neurosurgeon that came in said, well, you'll never be normal. And that was devastating for me. Of course, he was right. It was the truth. I will never be normal. I'm not sure if I was normal before, but anyway, I got to choose, and I chose the thinking that normal is a setting on my dryer, and my normal is going to look different. It is going to be different for me, and every day I get to choose what I'm going to focus on. And when you have burning nerve pain from the neck down, you have to decide, am I going to focus neck down or neck up? Am I going to focus on what's healthy and what's whole and what's good and what's right? Or am I going to focus on what I've lost and what's wrong? And I certainly have days where I focus on neck down thinking. That's what I like to call it, just what's wrong. And I have days where I struggle, but really trying to be intentional about focusing on neck up. And it is an intentionality. I was very blessed to have providers. I decided I wanted a second opinion from that first neurosurgeon. So when the neurosurgeon came in who had actually done my surgery, I asked him the same question, what's my prognosis? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, you're going to walk again. And so if I don't like the first answer, sometimes I'll ask for a second one, but not all injured workers do that. And so I think it's really important for us to be really careful with the words we use and with the attitude we go about treating someone. Because yeah, there's a lot of things wrong, but there's a lot of things right. There's always a lot of things right.
Becky, I'm very curious about other stakeholders that were involved with your injury. And you've talked positively about your healthcare providers, but could you reflect upon your relationship with and what support or maybe challenges you've had with your family, employer, the insurance company, the adjuster, and I don't know whether or not you had an attorney involved in this case.
Okay. Well, you started with family, and I will say that I married my high school sweetheart. We met when we were 16, and we're still married, and he's been a wonderful support all the way through, and not everyone has that. I have 3 wonderful kids, and I have many friends, and I had a wonderful personal support system. So I think that's a big advantage that I have over some injured workers. And frankly, why the coaching that we do is twice a week. People need support. They need someone to walk alongside them and say, this is going to be okay. The insurance company that I had, I can't say enough good. I don't know if you want me to mention who they are, but I have had only one no from them. And that one no, I am so grateful for. I asked for a scooter, and they said no. As I hike every morning, I'm so grateful for that no. But other than that, I had a very good experience. I did not understand the work comp system, and it was very confusing. Every single person who came into my room that found out that I was workers' comp said, "Oh, you're going to have a terrible experience. Workers' comp, they'll screw you. They won't take good care of you. You won't get the care you need." And that was not my experience at all. But I went into it with very skeptical eyes, and that was a really. I wish from the beginning I would have trusted that they wanted the best for me. But I know that that's not the case with all injured workers. It may be because of the catastrophic nature of my injury. And, everything shows on an MRI when you have a broken neck. Maybe that's why I had the experience. I don't know. But I remember having a really wonderful case manager, but I didn't know that. And I made her sit out in the waiting room while I went in to see the doctor for probably 6 months until I figured out she was there to make sure I had the care I needed. And so if I had to go back, I would do that differently. I have publicly apologized to her. But I didn't know. And so that was a piece of it that I wish I could do differently. But I had a very good experience and very good care all the way along.
Becky, you didn't mention an attorney. Did you have an attorney?
I didn't until the very end. And then actually, I was advised to. I'm not sure that I needed it. I had a very good attorney just for the settlement portion of it. I did not settle out on my medical. I have that for the rest of my life because I will need it. But on the settlement portion of things, I did have an attorney.
So that sounds like more from the technical aspects of
Yeah.
the contracts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Peggy, I'm also curious that you've read the book Living Able, A Guide to Injury Known as Recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the principles that I discussed in that book, was that consistent with what you found had been helpful to you?
Very much, very much. I wish I had it right here in front of me and I could read those off. But yes, as I read through that, I was hearing just your heart for helping people live abled, and those 10 principles, so important in really moving out of the disabled mindset and into the mindset of really living in such a way that that life can still be good even when we have things that aren't perfect, normal, as you can say.
Thank you for sharing that with me. And I think one of the challenges we face is that when people have an injury or illness, that the various stakeholders, including the providers, the insurers, employers, don't really actively engage in a positive way with the person who is hurt. That they don't empower, they don't engage, they don't educate that individual. I think that's an opportunity for improvement. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I had some that did and some that didn't, but in working with the clients that we work, we also have 2 VA contracts. In working with them, we hear all kinds of stories of, negativity and just not empowering them to really move out of that place of passive patient into active manager. And I think that that's the biggest paradigm shift for me, going from a patient, from being a passive patient where I'm having surgeries and I'm having pills and procedures and things that I really needed at the beginning. Then the pain comes along and I'm thinking, okay, I still need to be the passive patient. Somebody else needs to fix this. Nope, we're in a different place now. And instead of being a passive patient, I need to be an active manager of my own experience of pain. And so in order to do that, I need people that understand that don't treat me like a passive patient, but convey the whole thinking that, okay, now it's on you. There are things that you can do to manage this. And as your doctor, I can't make the pain go away, but there are things that you can do to really live abled, and sharing those things with the patient.
Well, you have such a powerful story to tell, and I wish more had the experience that you had in the recovery process. And despite such a significant injury, so again, I applaud you, and so delighted that you're sharing your experience with others so they can have different outcomes. What are your thoughts?
Well, Becky, I had a question for you. You mentioned that the first neurosurgeon that you asked about prognosis said you're never going to be normal, and I'm very aware of how powerful those kinds of words are, because I've worked for a long time with people who've heard those kinds of words and gotten stuck on them.
Yeah.
The way that you tell the story, it's almost as if you from the very beginning, you just weren't going to take that for an answer. Is that the way you experienced it, or was there a gap in between when you sort of changed your mind, and how did that go for you?
I did. I don't know if it's just my personality or what, but I decided that I was going to try to get as abled as I could possibly get. And I did have some, that neurosurgeon that told me you're going to walk again. I also had a physiatrist that really helped me during that time. I was another one of the devastating news pieces that I got during that time was the urologist came in. And I hope this isn't too personal for me to share here, but this was really basically a turning point. As I look back, there was 2 of them. One was you're going to walk again, and the other was the urologist came in and he just stood at the end of my bed. I was in inpatient rehab, and he just looked at me after looking at my chart for a while, and he said, "You're not going to have bowel and bladder function." And of course, when you're a new spinal cord injured person, you don't know anything about anything. And I was devastated. I was crying, and the nurse came in and she sent the physiatrist in, and he stood at the whiteboard and he diagrammed out, the brain and the spinal cord and and the whole bowel bladder system. And he said, this is how it works. And he said, I want you to focus on getting as well as you can get. We're going to get as much function as we can possibly get. And he said, right now we don't really know anything. We're 3 weeks out, and we don't really know anything about bowel and bladder, and that urologist can say that, but we don't know. So I want you to focus one day at a time on working as hard as you can here and getting as much function as you can get. So that's what I did. That calmed me down. He calmed me down several times like that, because this is all new and different. And you don't know what's going to happen or what is happening in your body. And I wanted to say that the urologist was wrong. I'm very grateful. Sometimes the urologist is right. Sometimes, sometimes that's how it ends. My story ended differently, but there's plenty of things that don't work right on me. But what his words were to me, that we're going to get back as much function as we possibly can. And so, I'm 11 years out, but I go a couple of days without exercising, and my pain goes up. I go a couple of days with too much tension, and my pain goes up. I go a couple of days without pacing myself, or without eating right, or without keeping my head in the right place, and my pain goes up. So every day I have to be pretty intentional about my routine. And so I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it is every day. I have to be intentional about what I focus on, about my routine, all of those things.
I think the thing that I'm resonating with, and that I keep coming back to, and that's why I asked you the question, that the messages you were getting from, that one provider at least, and it sounds like more than that, and what you took away from it, it's always about agency. It's always about, we don't know how it's going to turn out, but there's something you can do about it. There's something we can do about it. That's the connection also to living able, that decision to do as much as possible.
Right.
We see people for whom the physical outcome isn't as good as yours. You could have ended up with a mobility impairment, and still they're doing everything and sometimes, that person is doing what they need to in order to live. Right. If a wheelchair is your way of getting around, then that's your way of getting around, as opposed to being wheelchair bound. It's a way of getting around. It's always about that agency, that ability to do something.
There's always people who have it worse, and always people who have it better. And what I tell people is, it's not a contest. People will say, "Oh, I don't have the kind of pain you have," and I'm like, "Well, that's okay. We're not in a contest. We're all just going to have to make choices and do the best we can."
Yeah. You don't get a prize for having more pain.
No.
Right.
No prizes.
And then, Becky, some of the important guidance that you've shared that I think will be helpful to others is that you find you need to be active, that you have to be active, you have to exercise, but also you need to pace that in a reasonable way, and you're attentive to your diet. Now, one thing you didn't mention, and I don't know if you could share with us, is many people who I've seen over the years who've had a similar type of injury, have chronic pain, have been tragically put on the opioids, oxycodone or other agents. Did you deal with that issue?
I did. They trialed all kinds of different narcotics and different medications on me. And by the time the medications are high enough to do anything for my central nerve pain, I'm not functional. And one thing that I have discovered over the years of working with people with chronic pain is, we have about 74% that once they go through our program decide to get off opioids. And I have yet to have a person say, I'm off opioids, I have more pain. Most of the time, really 99% of the time, they say, I have less pain now. And I can think, and I can read, and I can function, and I can exercise, and I'm not constipated, and. So, I have my own thinking about this, that once in a while, opioids help people with functionality, but most of the time, I would say that that we're better off once we can lower and get off all the medications, and once we have tools. I don't take any medications for my pain. I still have the same burning nerve pain. It just doesn't have me anymore. I like to tell my clients, it used to be driving my car, and now it's in the trunk. Still have it, it just doesn't have me. I'm driving, it's in the trunk.
Yeah.
And once we have the tools for managing our pain, then we can really live. For me, being on those meds made me feel like I was a terminally ill patient, and I'm not dying. I'm trying to live. And so once I was off of those, I was able to, I run a business. I have full days every day. I travel and I speak and I write and I manage. I think we have 23. I have 23 people working for me right now. So, I live a full, healthy life, and I would not be able to do that while on opioids.
Yeah, you're so inspiring, Becky, in terms of how you dealt with that. And our experience has been, both in the literature and then professional experience, is that when people are on opioids for chronic non-malignant pain, pain not related to cancer, it's typically a travesty. It's been largely influenced by big pharma because of profits and physicians not being skilled and doing things that are not appropriate. And that with the opioids, we get into problems with increased sensitivity to pain, hyperalgesia. And when we stop, is we improve function. And that really came to very personally impacted me when we had a family member who had problems with the back pain and had been on opioids for about 2 years. And I didn't know this family member was on them. And I was really upset. I was alarmed. Said, why? Why are you taking that stuff? And she decided, I think I freaked her out so much that she decided she was going to get off them. She tried to contact her physician, who somehow had disappeared now from the last time that she got the prescription and was no longer to be found. And she went through and detoxed herself, which is not the ideal way to do that. She tapered over 6 weeks. I saw her about 2 weeks ago and said, "How are you doing?" And I'd seen her after she, detoxified. She was doing pretty well. She said, "It's amazing. The pain, it's gone. And I'm feeling so great. And I'm doing yoga, and I'm I'm playing golf again, and I'm happy. And and I'm just really so sorry that I stole 2 years of what I should have been as a spouse from my husband, and I just had 2 years that I just wasted, and I'm just so happy now. But I'm just I wish that I never had that experience and wasted 2 years of my precious life because of those medications that were prescribed. So I think that's, hopefully we have continuing awareness that is inappropriate, and your story certainly reflects that.
I hope that continues.
So I'd like to take a moment and this, you mentioned specifically and you've been showing an example of really two things. One thing that Les brought up is the concept of agency, right? The fact that you continue to move on and to act and to live. And the other one is resiliency. And the level of resiliency you've shown in really moving forward with, post-trauma, essentially, has been interesting. And I'd like to hear some commentary from you about how you feel that first thing, how you feel you came to that place, and then some comment from the docs about, factors that influence resiliency.
I think that the support was a real factor with my resiliency. I also feel like I had really healthy coping skills already in place before my accident,
Mm-hmm.
and not perfect. I mean, I this hasn't been just a flawless transition from normal to not normal, but I think support is a really big piece. And I'm a very, very curious person. And so I went to the functional restoration program, and I came home and I read everything I could read. One of the very first books I read was a wonderful book called The Gift of Pain by Philip Yancey and Paul Brand. Paul Brand was a doctor to India and worked with lepers. And it is a really excellent book. And that was my first little window into, I think, one of my favorite quotes out of that book is where he says that pain needs to be the servant, not the master. And then the second book I read that was really influential in my thinking and in the development of my program was a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. And that's a book by Norman Doedge, Dr. Norman Doedge, and it talks about neuroplasticity and how our brains have the ability to change. And what we focus on, we empower and enlarge. And as we focus on pain, those 9 areas of the brain that process chronic pain, Dr. Michael Moskowitz says, those can go from 5% of the cells in those 9 areas to 25% of the cells in those 9 areas. And so basically we become what we think about, as a man thinketh. And so realizing those things, I think that was really a big part of me getting back. It was a gradual process. It wasn't something that happened all at the same time. I want to mention family one more time. And when you go through severe chronic pain, nerve pain, and I was laying in the recliner, I was heavily medicated, I wasn't sleeping at night, my family was very worried about me. And every time they'd walk in the room, I'd see the worried, sad, hopeless, helpless look on my husband's face, on my kids' faces, on my mom and dad's faces. And coming back from the functional restoration program, learning that the more I focus on pain, the worse my pain is going to be. I had to have conversations with my family, starting with my husband. Please don't ask me about my pain anymore. It was the most difficult for my mom. And I've given her permission to ask me once a year.
That's great.
But they rarely ask me. Rarely does anybody ask me about my pain anymore, because my pain behaviors are gone and I have wellness behaviors. So most people have no idea that I'm burning from the neck down. And to really tell you the truth, the burning is my normal, just like my pins and needles. That's my normal. So I don't really think of it as something really terrible anymore. It just is my normal. And it's not hurting me. It's not causing damage. I don't have some kind of terrible thing that I'm going to die of. That was my first concern. I really thought I was dying. And once you let go of all of that, once the fear goes away, once the fear avoidance goes away, once the activity goes up, then the pain comes down. I never tell people we'll get rid of your pain,
Right.
because that's not a fair, to me, that's not a fair or a right statement. That makes me like a snake oil salesman. But to be truthful, for a lot of people, it does go away. Once they get the fear under control and they start exercising and everything else, the fear does go down. Or away. I don't know. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah.
I don't know.
Uh-oh. Becky went away.
That's okay. So you guys comment. If you two comment on that, and I'll see if we can.
I was going to say that I was struck by the idea of neuroplasticity and that brains can change. And it occurs to me that it's much more than that. It's not that brains can change. It's that brains are constantly adapting to what we do. So if you focus on
I could continue on with Les.
So now we've lost Les. So
I
go
think
ahead,
that's such a
Chris.
crucial, the concept is neuroplasticity is that our brains always are changing. So they can change in a negative way. So if we focus on what we can't do, we focus on our pain, we're going to have a down spiral. If we focus on the positive, there are going to be positive changes that occur, and we're going to increase our function. So that's something that's ongoing, and that's a concept that is a relatively new concept. And I suspect that many healthcare providers are not familiar with that. I think I would second your suggestions in terms of the book, The Brain That Changes, is great. Another book that I found very useful is the Mel Paul's book on the pain antidote, how we deal with pain. That's very helpful.
Very good.
Resiliency is a key issue. Last week at the Maine Medical Center in Portland, where we had that great opportunity to visit, Becky, while you were in Portland, Maine. Mm-hmm. They had a whole day looking at health disparities, and actually they got into two issues there, is adverse childhood experiences and the tremendous impact of that, and then the need for resiliency. And that, also that, particularly if we had adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, were less likely to develop resiliency skills later in life. Mm-hmm. And then the question I had is, well, what do we do with resiliency? So you've had an injury or illness. What is the best approach to having somebody be resilient? And the answer was relatively simple. It said relationship. That if you have challenges with resiliency, it's really those relationships in your life that are very important, the caring, the supportive relationships. And it would seem just a very simple, probably not comprehensive, but answer to how we deal with resiliency.
And that's another piece of the coaches working with the clients, walking alongside them. We tell them, you can borrow our courage until you have your own, that life can still be okay. We want to give them hope, and, we're solutions focused, and we want to give them hope and solutions and support, because, most of the people that we work with have very high ACE scores. That's not something that we test for at this point, but it is something that we're very well aware of, and it usually gets shared with us as the coach.
So I think that's so important, the work you're doing in terms of coaching, because often that typically doesn't occur. You just think of the context that the typical person that I see, they have an injury, they go to a healthcare provider, we pay physicians for doing things, they're influenced by big pharma, they aren't paid for really, and often I think don't have the skills to educate and empower, and certainly they don't have the time to do that. So they're not going to have that relationship. Often the employer may be distant, the adjuster may be something different than what your experience was. Families may not know how to, they're dealing with their own issues there. You don't really have that type of support. So people look at other, how do I get support? Well, you see the ads, everywhere, billboards and TV. If need the support, is call me as an attorney and I will fight for you. And then we pay attorneys the more injured, more ill, the more disabled they are. So they're really not going to provide you the support that you need. They'll do to position things so that you recover, they recover as much money as possible. So you're really in a very difficult situation. So I think when you have an avenue, when you have somebody come in as a coach to really help that person, listen to that person, understand, and give positive feedback, that's so incredibly important.
Yeah.
Les, your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually, and I'm sorry to have missed part of that conversation. I was on a roll.
Hopefully I continued.
Well, keep going.
Good. I'm sure you did. You know, I just wanted, this may take us in a slightly different direction, but you said something, Chris, that is very easy for us to take for granted. And I try to challenge it when I hear it, that, you know, the physician doesn't have time. And it just occurred to me when you said it, that all of the things that Becky has said that were helpful from her physician didn't take any time at all. It was the language that was being used that could hurt or harm. It takes exactly the same amount of time to say, you know, you're never going to be normal, as it does to say, hey, we're going to help you get as functional as you possibly can. Those two things take exactly the same amount of time. And it just,
a great insight.
It just occurred to me as you were saying that I think that we talk ourselves out of, as, you know, when we're in practice, I think we talk ourselves out of being helpful by thinking that it will take a long time. And I think the place to start is with things that don't take any time at all. Just change the way that we talk. And it just now occurred to me to point it out in that way.
I like that.
I like that too. That's really important.
It kind of makes me think about mirror box therapy. Do you guys know about mirror box therapy? You know, where you're looking into the mirror at what's right and what's healthy and what's whole. And, you know, when somebody has lost a limb, they can often have pain in that missing limb that's not even there, right, you know, because all the pain is processed in the brain. And Dr. Ramachandran, when he developed the mirror box, he wanted to help this man develop his brain. And when he looked into the mirror at the healthy hand, the pain in his brain went away in the missing limb. And after working with that mirror box for, I think, 6 months, he retrained his brain, and he was able to take that that missing limb out of his brain in such a way. And so what I like to tell people is, you know, when we focus on what's healthy and what's right and what's whole, then the rest of life can be okay. And the same goes for providers. I know that providers have to be honest with people when they're talking to them about what's wrong. But helping this injured worker focus on what's healthy and what's right and what's whole is going to end up being what helps that person have the most function. And, you know, we can still be honest and say, like Dr. Ross did to me, you may lose bowel and bladder. You know, that may be the end result. But for right now, we're not going to focus on that. For right now, we're going to focus on getting back the most function that we can. And that's helpful.
Yeah, you know, there are studies from the old, well, now a long time ago, some of the cancer literature around sort of what impact attitude had. And optimists as a whole did better than pessimists. You know, somebody who believed they were going to die tended to have worse outcomes than somebody who was convinced they were going to live. But the interesting thing is that the people who did the very best in terms of outcomes were people that we came to call realistic optimists, the message and the language that they used was, I don't know whether I'm going to live or die, but there's something I can do about it.
Mm.
It's really interesting that those people did better than the pure optimists. So that's the brilliance of what your physician said to you, you know, and that you could take it in, that we don't really know what's going to happen, but we're going to stay focused on doing everything we can.
Right.
I'm just so struck by that in your story, Becky.
Mm-hmm. It was a pretty powerful moment because I still remember it 11 years later.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So I'm so glad that you remember that and not you're never going to be normal. Well, you remember it, but you remember it dismissively.
Right.
No, Les, I was thinking about how we convey that to our colleagues, our healthcare providers, that you have your book, the recent book from the AMA on how we interface with disability benefit systems, and which, you know, aspects of that will be featured in this month's Guides newsletter. So I appreciate that. But how do we, you know, I think that's a whole other training about how do we choose our words very wisely when we're interfacing with patients, because I think about, you know, I went to an academic medical center and we were taught to diagnose and to treat.
Right.
I never had any teaching about how to choose my words. At least over the years, I realized that many times I chose my words pretty damn poorly, you know? But I never learned how to do that. And that's a real thought about, because that is so incredibly powerful. And, you know, and I think we've probably all had experiences when we've said things that we shouldn't have said, or we said them in the way that we didn't mean to say them, and they have, you know, profound impact. So fortunately or not, I don't know if it's that's probably more my personal life than my professional life. I don't know if that's good or bad, but anyways.
Right. Well, I think that's really, I mean, honestly, I wish I had this thought about how it takes exactly the same amount of time. I wish I'd had that before I wrote the chapter about communication, because it would have been better. But I think teaching about that is, I think that can be really kind of a powerful way of communicating. So that's why it's so important to choose words wisely. And you also said something, Chris, that I think is true of physicians. And I also think by and large, it's true of most psychologists and most psychotherapists, that we essentially also learn a medical model. We learn to diagnose and treat, as opposed to join with someone and help them improve their lives and function. You know, we've kind of lost sight of that as the primary means by which we help people get better. And we're eminently trained in diagnosis and treatment, but not so much in that, how do we choose our words in such a way that we help empower people to live ably, to make good decisions about getting more functional. I think that's the great thing about the three of us coming together in this way to have this conversation, because we have the perspective, Becky, of you who's been through this experience and gone on to be helpful. And I just lost Becky. And, you know, Chris, you're really focused on, you know so much about the physician's role in this, and now are really focusing on the patient and how to help them live ably. I think it's a great combination. Welcome back, Becky.
Thank you.
And I think we'll also have the opportunity to continue this conversation the next week when we're live at Comp Law Day, as part of the Work Comp Central program in Burbank, California, and before a live audience, that we should have this same discussion.
Yeah.
And I was also reflecting upon how we typically work as healthcare providers, and then, you know, that following week, I'm with my spouse. We're off to the Peru, deep in the Amazon rainforest, and spending 2 weeks with shamans there to see how that experience is. So it's all you have to do is fly to Peru, small plane for a couple hours, jeep for 4 hours, and then an hour hike in.
Oh, is that all?
That's all. But to really, so no cell phones or internet while I'm there, but it's to see how a different model works. And I think the experience like with shamans, where there's actually a rich personal relationship, is so different than what we otherwise have. So we could afterwards reflect upon what that experience is if I find my way out of the jungle.
Yeah.
So
I hope you do, because I'm dying to hear about it.
Yeah, that might be a whole other simulcast. Is the shaman experience with living able?
That's going to be it's going to be very interesting. So when I come back, I can read that.
I can imagine. So I'd like to. I'm going to bring in a question, and Becky, from your personal experience, we've talked about all the different ways in which you were resilient and successful, and we've shaded towards some of the barriers you've encountered. So I'm curious to hear from your experience, what barriers does an injured worker encounter, and then what can we do about it from all three of you?
Okay, well, I would say that from working with injured workers for the last 8 years, one of the biggest barriers they have is just anger and resentment and misaligned expectation. And that just all came off the top of my head. I wasn't prepared for that question, but I would say the misaligned expectation is this expectation that we all seem to have in this society, that we're supposed to be pain-free and disability-free, and everything is supposed to go just really great, and that if we're injured on the job, they'll give us several $1 million. That's another. They have these expectations, and the expectations are not correct. Many people, whether they're an injured worker or not, live quite well with pain and disability, and their life is just fine. Before my accident, I had a neighbor, and I knew he was a veterinarian, and I knew he was friendly and nice. We always talked, but I didn't know why he walked funny. I didn't know why he walked all the time. He was either walking or riding his bike around the neighborhood, and I didn't know that when he stopped his bike, I didn't know why instead of putting on brakes, he would just grab a telephone pole. He would, kind of slow down and then grab a telephone pole, and that's how he would stop himself. Well, after my accident, he came to the hospital and visited me. It come to find out, he was also an incomplete quadriplegic with Brown-Sequard syndrome, just like me. And he encouraged me. He was quite a lot older than I was, but he had decided that he was not going to let this stop him. He had to sneak his bike because he said his wife would have just had a fit if she would have known when he first started doing it, because he didn't have the ability to use handbrakes, and so anyway, he rigged up some things that would help him stop, including something hanging from the ceiling in his garage so he could grab it and jump off his bike with his one good arm. But I think we often have these expectations that life has to be pain-free to still be good. And I don't know how we can change the paradigm of our whole society. When you have advertisements on TV every night telling you that you can cure every single thing that any human has to deal with a pill, it kind of skews things slightly. And I would love for somebody to do a study one of these days, and maybe there's been one done, on the difference between how we as Westerners deal with pain and disability and how some of the third world countries, like the one that Chris is getting ready to go to, deal with pain. You see people in those countries that deal with things that are 10 times worse than anything that some of us deal with, and just keep working and keep doing life and keep caring for their children and seem to have a happy, good life. So I would say that misaligned expectation and the anger, those are some things that we talk with people about. You know, that anger, every time we have a negative thought, that causes stress hormones, which increases muscle tension, which increases pain. So how much power do you want that caseworker to have over you? You know, and this is, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, well, none. You know, I want to still be able to have a good, healthy life. Okay, well, how can we turn that around? So I'm not talking about it from the side of the provider, the case manager, the adjuster. You know, we rarely have any control over what others say or do or anything else, but we do have control over how we react to things. And that does in turn affect our quality of life and how we're able to live.
Yeah. How remarkable that you didn't even know why he walked funny.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, what a testament to the way that he lived, you know. Yeah. Interesting.
So, gentlemen, what barriers do you find the injured worker encountering, and then what do we do about it? You know, Chris, actually, let's start with you.
Well, I think that, you know, the language that we've been talking about, and also just I think one of the barriers for from the physician side, from the treater side, is that, you know, we want to make people feel better, and that turns out to be a barrier in those cases where symptom relief is not the answer, that function is the answer, but it gets in the way. You know, we want to be helpful. And sometimes being helpful is the least helpful thing that we could do in that way, right? So that's a barrier.
Yeah, I just want to reflect on the issue of symptoms that we so often in our society, we're bombarded by ads that we should not be experiencing symptoms. So that, and you know, the direct-to-consumer ads, it's unique to us and only one other country in the world. But there's a lot of money to be made for people having symptoms that then felt not to be acceptable, and or then for us to take those symptoms and put a diagnostic label on it. So that I think most people, chronic pain, most of us, as we age, experience pain. It's just part of life. Or we may have you know, other issues that we face, but we become we focus in a negative way. The neuroplasticity sort of emphasizes that rather than just say, yeah, that's part, you know, that's just part of how I experience my life. That's and I'm not gonna focus on it. But unfortunately, our systems often do focus on it. You know, so what do we do? I think it's, you know, we understand what the key issues are. We realize the importance of what Becky has shared with us, is taking control, being positive as we go through our process, not being passive. The role of exercise, of diet, being appropriate in deciding what treatments we undertake for that. Returning to work, you know, that work is healthy. That was so important that you did that, and because that's, you know, gives you a purpose. It's a reason that why you get up every morning. You're contributing. That there are so many aspects of that, you know, that's one of the reasons I wrote Living Able. You know, we really need a guidebook to help to empower us. And so, you know, and I look forward to, you know, our conversation next week at Comp Laude. And I look forward to meeting others at the National Workers' Compensation and Disability Conference, where I'll be at the R3 Continuum booth with you both, which will be delightful. And hopefully Becky could join us there, and just hearing more of people's experiences.
Yep.
And with that remark, we have reached 2 p.m. So I'd like to thank all three of you for attending today, and anybody in our audience who's seen this. I think we had a good session in spite of some minor technical issues. And I look forward to seeing all of you at the National Work Comp event, and then also at the Comp Laude event in Burbank.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Yeah, I think the technical issues helped us demonstrate our resilience.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All righty, bye-bye.